Hey everyone, it's Lauren, and today we're going to talk about protagonists. Now, the definition of a protagonist in its most basic form is the main character. Effectively, it's the central figure in your narrative project. It is the person who is going to influence the plot most directly and who is going to have the most central role to the narrative. Now, one thing I want to do right up front is clarify the difference between a protagonist versus good guys. Now, you can kind of look at this as a little bit of a Venn diagram, because often the protagonist is the good guys, and very often the good guys are the protagonists. However, there are several scenarios in which case the protagonist is not necessarily the good guys. It could be like an anti-hero, it could be a story following the antagonist, or what would normally be considered the antagonist, maybe an anti-hero. I think good guys is a somewhat limited definition because it already presupposes these characters, I don't know, alignment or something. It's like if you categorize someone as the good guys, you kind of don't really look at them, I guess, too objectively. And I think there's a certain level of basic expectation when you refer to somebody as a good guy versus a protagonist. It's like a good guy kind of is one of those, like, I guess, a squeaky clean kind of person who doesn't really do a lot of things wrong. Good guys are the kind of things you think of when you think of entertainment aimed towards younger audiences. Because like animated features, they have you're more focused at that age on like the good guys versus the bad guys, whereas opposed to a true protagonist, which I think kind of come into play when we reach like teenage audience members or something. Because, again, a lot of times they're the one and the same. But I want to make it clear, though, that they are not interchangeable. You can have a good guy that is not a protagonist and a protagonist that is not a good guy. They can be two different things. And let's get into what makes a good protagonist. And I was thinking about this when I was making up this outline. And one of the things that occurs to me that makes a good protagonist is that the protagonist needs to have a personal stake in the story. What happens in the narrative has to matter to them specifically. If it's something that doesn't really affect them or that they're not really all that concerned about, they probably aren't a good protagonist, or the story might need some tweaking. Because if they don't care what happens one way or the other, they're not motivated to move the story forward. Whereas a protagonist that has a personal stake is like, say that you're trying to save your family business, you're trying to find your father, you're trying to establish a new home. Any of these things drive your actions, which results in things blocking your path, which is what protagonists have to deal with. Now, the second important quality of a protagonist is that they need to be accessible. They have to be someone the reader can identify with. You may want to write about your alien space god who gives out candy with the flick of his hand. But, I mean, that is fine, but it's also kind of hard for people to get to know, to get to relate to, because they have no common experience. It's like your main character should be somebody that is like, a husband, a father, a family member, a wife, I don't know, somebody that has I guess a real world tether that you can relate to. I mean, I'm not trying to break this down to like gender or occupational roles, but like let's say like you're writing a story about a spaceship crew. You would have like maybe a captain, maybe they're military, maybe they're just working people working like a mining ship or something. But whatever the case, you need to make sure that the characters that you present are somebody that the reader can empathize with, something that they kind of can have a frame of reference for their general experiences. Now, I've never been working on a mining ship in space, but, I kind of understand what it is to be like, working those kinds of jobs, at least intellectually. And, that's that sort of thing. It's like, things that, people read books and they understand things based on their experiences. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to have had that same experience. I've read, for example, I'm going to cite the Rafts by Utunu. It's like, I have never been a tribal member. I've never been stuck on an island, but it's like these books, these characters that he wrote were very accessible because they were people who I could understand. And same with the Red Vixen Adventures, which also is another one that I often quote because they did a very good job of capturing, mental illness, of capturing abuse, of capturing a bunch of characters that interact very well together, and people that whose may not their life experience may not match yours, but you can understand, you can sympathize, you can get where they're coming from. And that's an important aspect of a protagonist. It's like if I can understand you, I can follow your adventures. And the next thing that I think is important is that your protagonist has to be flawed in believable ways. It's like nobody likes a perfect person, okay? It's like somebody who just has everything, no hairs out of place, always does everything right. They've got more money than they know what to do with. Nobody likes people like that. And the reason why is because I think it's just, I don't know, perfection is really an unachievable goal, so maybe it's about perceived perfection, but it also just means that it's very hard for people to empathize with characters that make no mistakes, that have no flaws, no personal issues. It doesn't feel real to us because for 90%, 99% of people, we all have flaws. Let's face it, we're not perfect people. We've got issues. I've got my hang-ups. You've got yours. But the whole point is that your protagonist has to have them too. And they have to be believable flaws. It's like, I guess, I don't know, one of the things that it's like, I don't like interruptions. I don't like breaks in my schedule. Those things kind of bother me, and I don't work as efficiently if that happens. Now, I'm sure I can find some other flaws for myself. It's like but those are, I'm just kind of doing this on the fly a little bit with my outline. But let's say that character is like always late for work or something, that they can't seem to get their life together. Maybe they are quick to anger and they get into fights because of their temper. The point is that we need to have their main characters show that they are vulnerable to things, that they have issues, that they make mistakes, because they need to be, I guess realistic is a good way to put it. They need to be skilled enough at what they're doing, but, nobody's perfect. And that's something that you need to remember, especially for your protagonist, because just like we're not perfect, neither are they. And it's going to be a lot easier for people to understand your character's motivations if they are in a similar boat. So, let's see, the fourth element for a good protagonist is that they have to be compelling. This is somebody that's got to be interesting enough that you want to watch, that you want to read about, because at first glance, like just looking at it from a universal perspective, everybody's the hero of their own story. But more generally, if you looked at the planet, you would see 7 billion people. Well, why is it that this person is more interesting than the rest? Because this person has something about them that is compelling. Their behavior, their personality, their story, their situation, whatever it is, it has to be something that draws your attention into them and narrows them in as the central character. Because, in any book you read, the reader should never be asking the question, why is the book about this person? The details that you add should make it clear as to why this person is the protagonist, because they have to be someone you want to watch. They have to be somebody that draws your attention, that gravitates the other characters to come around them, for the story to develop. So this is important, that this character has enough gravitas, has enough depth to them, that it is clear this is why this story is about them and not one of the others. And it's, not to say that supporting characters aren't important, but we're talking about protagonists in this case. So, the protagonist has to be able to pull the weight of the story. And, the last thing I want to say about protagonists in particular is that they have to be a certain level of complexity. Now, what I mean by that is that the complexity of the character has to match the story that they're leading. So, if you're working on a story for young audiences, they're typically like, bright colors, not a lot of backstory. Things are relatively simplified just for the young audiences. And then when you get to the other end of the spectrum, you look at a movie made for adults, and the characters are a lot more complicated, the details are a lot more specific, and so it is along and across the scale. It's like if you're writing a story for an adult audience, your characters need to be more complex and more complicated than it would be if you were writing a children's book. And the talent that you need to calibrate is how complex does the hero need to be. Now, obviously there's some flexibility here because, if it's an adult story, there's no specific measurement as far as how complicated they need to be, but they need to be complicated enough so that they fit in the story. They need to be, they need to have enough going on about them to sort of draw them into the level of the narrative that you're telling. The more complex the narrative, the more complex your main character needs to be. Now, I would say that in the case of Rafts, that the main characters aren't super complex, but they kind of don't need to be. Not that it's aimed for a younger audience. It's an excellent book, and one I do, once again, highly recommend. But the setting is relatively simple. So the characters sort of fit right in. And, it's, again, simple here isn't a bad thing because it's exactly what they need. They match the complexity of their story, of their environment, so they fit perfect. In other cases, you might find, like I remember one of Kale Gold's books, where the characters are a little, definitely more complex, but they live in a more complex world, and this kind of suits them. And I'm not exactly sure if I'm explaining this well, but complexity, it's the more, I guess, involved the world is, the more details your characters need to have in order to feel like they fit, in order to have everything in the story click the way it's supposed to. And usually the protagonist ends up on the cover of the book, the cover of the jacket or whatever. And I would also say that that a good protagonist is critical to a story's success. Because if you don't have a good protagonist, you don't have a good story. And it's important that you make sure that you consider some of these factors when you're developing or evaluating your own protagonists.
If you like werewolves, check out my book Blue Moon, available in paperback and ebook on Amazon. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Catch you later.